Hello, scientists. Ms. Getz here. I'm sad to not be here in class today, but I'm trying to make our class better with some other science teachers across St. Paul. So I have some support for you in looking at our data and trying to make sense of what the story is with Earth's climate in the past. And we're going to be looking at 3 different texts. Each text has a graph, and each graph is about some period of time. And it looks at a couple of different things. So this first one you can tell is, again, it's some period of time, and it looks like it's 400,000 years ago. And it says that it's glacial, interglacial cycles over the past 450,000 years. And again, this word is glacial. I think probably you know a little bit about what that means. And then interglacial, that must mean something related to this word glacial. So we're going to first talk a little bit about what glacial means, and then I'm going to tell you about how I'd like you to structure some things in your notebook. So first off, glacial is something that I think you're a little bit familiar with. A glacier can form, and a glacier, which is what glacial means it relates to, glacial relates to glaciers, is a big mass of ice and snow. So it's snow that has snowed on top of snowed on top of snowed, and it hasn't melted, and it compacts to end up being a big old pile of ice. And so here's a glacier in a mountain. But glaciers can actually happen in lots of places and have happened historically in lots of places on Earth. And so here I have this video that shows us glaciers happening over the past 20,000 years, and it's in North America. It doesn't really look that much like North America just yet, but as this video proceeds, you'll notice that the glacier is receding. It's going backwards, getting smaller. And that, oh hey, now you recognize right here, we live here. And so let's watch that one more time. So again, we live right here. This is where we live. And so 18,000 years ago, we would have seen a glacier right here where we live in Minnesota. And you can see the glacier it increases sometimes, it decreases sometimes, and then it really decreases and recedes and goes away. Intriguing. And so today we do still see some glaciers on Earth. There are still glaciers in mountains here on Earth. There's still a glacier where Greenland is and where Antarctica is. But right now on Earth, there are not a ton of glaciers. And so we can actually describe times on Earth as times when there's a lot of glaciers. We call it a glacial period. And times when there's not a lot of glaciers, an interglacial period. And that means that it's between glacier periods. So this prefix inter means between. And so I'm going to ask you actually to jot down these 2 words, glacial period, when Earth is partially covered with sheets of ice called glaciers, and interglacial period, which is when the Earth is mostly free of the big sheets of ice or glaciers. So I'd like you to take a moment and actually pop these on page 84 and 85. They're going to be where we place our climate vocabulary words, and you're going to want to pause the video right now so you can write them down. Excellent. So we've got these 2 words. And so what you're going to do in class today is look at 3 different graphs and really make sense of what they are telling you. So first off, you're going to put each graph in a specific location in your notebook. So graph 1 is going to go on page 81. Logical. Please glue or tape it in place. The 3 graphs are at the front of the room, and you should pick up one of each. And then for each one, you're going to go through and read the graph. Really make sure to look at what's on the axes. Look at what happens over time. Interesting. And then annotate, circle things, notice stuff, point out things. Maybe look at the amount of time between things that are similar or different. And so then I'd like you to actually write down 3 things that you notice on that graph. 3 things that are happening on this graph that you can see. I can see the temperature. I notice the temperature is increasing, and it's at its peak in interglacial, and then it's decreasing in the glacial. You might talk about the pattern you see overall. You might talk about how much time it takes to get from one glacial to another glacial period. But you want to write down some things you notice. And then you're going to find other people who have also written some things down about this text. And you're going to say, oh, hey, what did you say? Share with the people at your table. With each individual, just sharing one or two things you noticed. And then I'd actually like you to write down what you heard from someone. So I might say, from Mr. Bartlett, I heard that the highest temperature point is about 130,000 years ago. So I'm just going to write down one thing I heard from someone else. And then lastly, I'd like you to summarize what that graph showed. So this graph shows the last how long, how much time, the last however many years. This graph shows the last 450,000 years. And overall, I see blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to describe what is happening in 1 or 2 sentences right here in my notebook. And then you're going to go on to the next graph. If you'd like, you can actually start by getting your notebook set up. Graph number 2 or text number 2 is going to go right here on page 82. And again, you're going to go through this exact same process. And then, as you can imagine, text number 3 is going to go on page 83, and you're going to follow the exact same process. If you're feeling pretty good about this and you are looking at the graphs and you're like, yeah, okay, cool, I can read through this and understand it. I'm comfortable with what the graph looks like. You can stop the video now and go ahead and complete this assignment. You're going to take a picture of both pages in your notebook to turn it in at the end of class today. But if you want a little bit more support, I'm actually going to talk a little more about text number 2 and text number 3 right now. So keep watching this video. So text number 2 is about temperature and ice accumulation in the Arctic. That's above 65 degrees north over the past 17,000 years. So it's kind of like we're looking at just this little chunk right here of this first graph. So we're zooming in on this first graph and we're looking at it specifically in the Arctic. So this is where it's pretty cold all the time. You'll notice that it says ice accumulation in blue right here. So accumulation means build up. I accumulate assignments as students turn them in. And that's this blue line on the graph. And then in red, I have the temperature here in the Arctic. So again, this is not where we live. It's the average temperature in the Arctic. And that's in degrees Celsius. And so you can see that in this red line, so we can actually compare the two patterns and see what's happening. There's also a chunk of text here. If you'd like, you can pause and actually do your annotations right now before I read the chunk of text, because again, your goal is to read and annotate the graph to highlight the 2 or 3 most important details and write those down in your notebook. But I'm going to read through this text right now. It says, within the incredibly short time span, by geologic standards, of only a few decades, Arctic temperatures changed by as much as 15 degrees Fahrenheit, or 8 degrees Celsius, or more. So they changed a lot in just a few decades. For example, as Earth was emerging out of the last glacial cycle, the warming trend was interrupted 12,800 years ago, when temperatures dropped dramatically in only several decades, beginning the period known as the Younger Dryas. We see that highlighted in yellow right here, the Younger Dryas. And you can see the sudden decrease in temperature here. Temperatures dropped dramatically. Then, 1,300 years later, temperatures in certain regions of Earth spiked as much as 20 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 degrees Celsius within just several years. Sudden changes like this have occurred at least 24 times during the past 100,000 years. So these sudden spikes happen. Interesting. So again, make sure that you've annotated your text and you've then share with your group mates. Tell them some annotations you made, some things you noticed, and write down a detail you heard from someone else. And then summarize this graph. Awesome. So then I'm going to go over a little bit more detail. Graph number 3. In graph number 3, we have, again, a focus on the Arctic. So that's above 65 degrees north. And we're looking at the summer temperature over the last 2,000 years. So again, we're zooming in time-wise. So we're only looking at the last 2,000 years. So that's just this little chunk here of this graph. And of our very first graph, it's just a teeny tiny little portion of this very first graph that went back 450,000 years. So here we have the present right here. This is right now. We're in 2020. Yeah, I know the year 25. And it goes all the way back to the year 1. Cool. And I can see on the graph, oh, this is in my way. I'm going to just get rid of it so it's not in your way. It says temperature anomaly. So temperature anomaly means it's how much the temperature has changed from the average temperature. So how much has it changed? And you can see that there's some spikiness to this data. You can also see the sort of orangey background. That's the uncertainty in the data. And if you're interested in learning more about uncertainty, you should ask me about it in class when we're next together. And so it says, the x-axis is difference compared to the average Arctic temperature over the last 2,000 years. Again, that's called temperature anomaly. How different is the temperature? The blue line shows estimates of Arctic temperature over the last 2,000 years based on records from lake sediments, ice cores, and tree rings. So by using those different data points, you can actually get a temperature value of the Earth based on how fast trees grow and how the ice accumulates over the course of a year on a glacier like in the Arctic. And then the green line shows the long-term trend up until about the time of the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is back here in the 1800s. And so they're showing what's the pattern overall before the 1800s. Okay, so for this graph, just like the others, you want to first annotate the graph. So circle some important stuff you're noticing. Write down 3 observations, 3 things you notice that sort of tell the story of this graph. Check in with a table mate. And then lastly, summarize. From this graph shows the last 2,000 years. And overall, you'll describe what you see is happening in this graph. You might talk about 2 different things that are even happening in this graph. And then again, you are turning in a picture of both this page of your notebook, page 82 and 83, and page 80 and 81 to get credit for this assignment. Thanks, folks. I hope you have a good day.